The Sports Town Podcast.
Alrighty, I am pleased to be joined by Brendan Abban of the KBR Sports podcast. How's it going, Brendan?
Good, man. How are you?
I am doing great. Thanks for coming on. I wanted to get you on. I saw you on Instagram. You had a pretty big podcast there, or pretty big network. So if you want to talk more about the way you do things, stuff like that, more about KBR Sports, where we can find you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, man. So KBR Sports, honestly, it's available anywhere you catch podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and I also have a YouTube channel for it where I kind of do video breakdowns of the NBA, NFL, and what kind of is just going on in sports and different narrative pieces I just do on there as well. And a lot of times with my podcast, I try to go at it from a very analytical standpoint, trying to break down the game and kind of come at the game at a different angle that people may not notice, like how big a play in a course of a basketball game, like how that Devin Booker play on Thursday, how that could have, or Wednesday, how that play could have changed the whole outlook of the game if maybe Giannis doesn't get the tip in to follow on that play. So I kind of dive into a lot of those type of things and make people realize just how critical different plays in a game are sometimes, and then just doing different interviews with people sometimes from time to time. So yeah, that's what normally I do on the KBR Sports podcast.
All right, that sounds great. Again, speaking of basketball, of course, we'll talk about the NBA Finals. But before I kind of want to mention the Olympic team. Seem like they're struggling a little bit. I know they lost, I think, on Monday and Tuesday. They ended up winning on, I think, Wednesday. But why do you think the Olympic team is struggling? Because even though they don't have LeBron or Kawhi, they still have Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, still, in my opinion, top 5 players. Why do you think they're struggling a little bit? And maybe it's because of, Popovich is, he's a great coach, but it's kind of a different style. But why do you think they're struggling so much this Olympics?
Yeah, I think part of it is in large part due to the fact that, think about, like you noted, Gregg Popovich changing of the guard some, because Mike Krzyzewski not really being that coach for them anymore, and all that he had built, and he had normally, people knew how things worked with Mike Krzyzewski. There was a level of familiarity there to some degree, but Gregg Popovich now stepping in and doing the Olympic team, in ways, yeah, you get some time to work out and fix all the little nicks in your armor, but to some degree, the amount of time that you get to prepare and stuff like that, especially depending on how late some of these players are playing into the postseason, then you're essentially only getting the amount of time similar to an all-star team gets to practice with each other and their coaches and stuff, but you just don't have the top tier high-end talent. Because if other teams in other countries, like basketball is an international sport at this point, so a lot of people are catching up, and you're seeing that there's a lot of talent, as we see with Luka Doncic and other players. We're seeing talent in other countries and areas start to become at a higher tier versus where it was in the past. So now, if we're just throwing together a team, even though the NBA is still the highest level of basketball, you're just throwing together a team, and you're really only giving these guys an all-star team's length of time to practice, and you're throwing them in with a coach that doesn't have a built-in system already with the Olympic program. You can have instances where you falter and have these losses.
Yeah, it's a little different. And yeah, again, you always kind of forget that Mike Krzyzewski had a really good relationship with most of these players. And of course, Pop has a different type of the way he does things. I'm a Spurs fan, but he does it almost completely different than any other coaches. Here's what Gregg Popovich had to say after a loss. I believe it was on Monday or Tuesday.
Let me also answer that question. You asked the same sort of question, the same family of question last time, where you assume things that are not true. When you just mentioned, blowing these teams out, that's never happened. So I don't know where you get that. Can I finish?
No, I mean,
can I finish?
You're saying that's not true. Your average margin.
Can I finish my statement?
Like 30 points a game. In those last two tournaments that I was talking.
Can I finish my statement? Okay. When you talk.
You just told me that it's not true, and I'm telling you your average margin.
Are you going to let me finish my statement or not? So you'll be quiet now while I talk, and then I'll listen to you. When you make statements about in the past just blowing out these other teams, number one, you give no respect to the other teams. And I talked to you last time about the same thing. We've had very close games against 4 or 5 countries in all these tournaments. So the good teams do not get blown out. There are certain games that might happen in one of the tournaments, in the World Championship, the Olympics, where somebody gets blown out. But in general, nobody's blowing anybody out for the good teams. So when you make a statement like that, it's like you assume that's what's going on. And that's incorrect.
As we continue with the Olympics, do you think they'll be able to win a gold medal for the third or fourth straight time?
I think they can. I think when you have the top talent in any league, you have a good chance to come out as the victor. But it's so much different than in the NBA, because in the NBA you're playing a series of games. So in the postseason, it's the best of 7. So you get multiple chances at it. And normally the most talented team is going to win out in that instance. But when it's just one shot, and if you're playing a team that has Luka Doncic now, because Luka's not playing for Team USA, and you're playing his team, and maybe that team is just hot on the right day, and you can have a very capable chance of losing to that team because these other teams are just they have more talent now. So I think they're still the favorites to win the gold medal, but they do have realistic chances of losing.
Yeah, you just mentioned Luka, and I think Luka even said that in his country, I think winning a gold medal would be more important than winning the NBA Finals. And I think he even said that too, that, winning a gold medal would be bigger than winning an NBA championship, which is kind of shocking. But at the same time, to beat the U.S. or to win the gold medal and the U.S. doesn't, that's really big. Like, U.S., of course, is the best country in basketball in the world. So, and of course, winning the gold medal would be so big, which is, you don't really think about that. But with players from other countries, they're kind of shocked. And it seems like a lot of the big players now, half of them are from outside the country or not from the U.S. Like, you got Luka Doncic, Jokic, Joel Embiid. There's a few other players, Rudy Gobert. There's just a bunch of players that are not from the U.S. And you look at the Spurs back in the day, half of them weren't even from the country of the U.S. So it is interesting how, it's really that important. You mentioned earlier before we started recording that Trey Young was kept off the U.S. Olympic team, and he kind of took some shots a few days ago. What do you think about that? And do you think, it's kind of shocking that Trey Young was left off the U.S. team.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that was a point of contention a lot of people had, especially when we saw like Kevin Love being included on the team, and people were like, well, you could have included another guard spot, especially with a guy as talented as Trey. But I felt like at least the explanation from Team USA was the fact that they felt like they were lacking in big men strength. But now, in terms of that slight that Trey felt from being left off the team, it's kind of interesting with Bradley Beal going through COVID protocol now and them having to find a replacement. It is interesting to see how that's going to play out, because part of the reason why I think Team USA also struggles when I've watched their games is the fact that they don't have a true point guard. And all the Team USAs of the past, whether it was Jason Kidd, Chris Paul, or whomever, they had at least a guy that was closer to a true point than a scoring guard. Damian Lillard's more of a shooting guard than he is a point guard. And at times you can tell that this team, they're so talented, they can just come up the floor and play ISO basketball, but that's just not going to get it done sometimes. And when the rules are different here and they're expecting to get certain foul calls and stuff like that, like you see guys flopping and they're getting angry because they're not getting calls, and it's like, dude, it's just a different league.
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of a loss for the U.S. for keeping Trey Young off. And I think, with the way Trey Young showed this postseason, I think I don't know if he's a top 5 point guard yet, but I think he's somewhere in there. And I think within a few years he could be, of course he is the future of the league, but in a few years he could be considered a top 3 point guard. But
I think, man, look, if we're talking about top 5 point guards, bro, he has a legitimate case, man. Like, if you're Eastern Conference Finals, like, obviously we know this season was riddled with injuries and stuff like that impacted it. But look, you got guys like Steph, you got Dame, you got Chris Paul, and then after you get through that tier, like those top 3 guys, it's like, okay, well then who are we? It's like a pick 'em almost, because then you start bringing up dudes like Russell Westbrook and other players. But it's like, well, Trey just got to the Eastern Conference Finals, and like, how much respect do you pay and credence to that?
Yeah, I think Trey Young, you just mentioned Russell Westbrook. I think within a year or two, I think Russell Westbrook as how good Russell Westbrook is, I feel like Trey Young within a year or two could surpass Westbrook, just because Trey Young's probably going to get farther in the playoffs, because if Westbrook stays in Washington, I don't think he's going anywhere. It's outside the first round. Yeah. And then, of course, like I said, yeah, you have the three kind of top point guards in the league. Like you just said, you got Lillard, you got Curry. I'm not exactly sure where Kyrie ranks, but I think he's somewhere in the top 5. And I think Luka's considered more of a point guard.
That's what makes it weird, right? Like it's these hybrids.
Yeah.
Is James Harden a point guard? You know what I mean? Like I don't know how to classify the guys.
Yeah, because I think Luka did come out of the draft as a shooting guard, I think, and he is 6'6", so he's kind of got that. I mean, Magic Johnson was 6'9" or something like that, and you have LaMelo Ball is 6'6", 6'7", and he's kind of a 1/2. I guess Lonzo's more of a shooting guard, but yeah, there's so many hybrids now, and maybe you don't go top 5 point guards. Maybe you just go the top 10 players in the league, because again, there's just so many hybrids, and of course there's not really a true center anymore. I mean, is it a power forward? Is it a center? But yeah, so it's crazy how that works, and how the last few years it's gone completely different from positionless basketball, as I would say. And you just mentioned Bradley Beal, or you mentioned earlier Bradley Beal's not going to be playing. He tested positive for COVID, or is in the COVID protocols. Who do you? I don't think they've replaced anybody yet, or replaced him with anybody yet. But who do you think the best option to replace Bradley Beal would be?
I personally feel like it was going to be Trey Young. I felt like Trey Young would be a really good replacement. I felt like maybe a guy like DeMar DeRozan maybe was a good replacement, because he has that relationship with Popovich to some degree. So he really kind of knows Popovich's scheme, how he likes to coach things up, and he's played Olympic basketball before. But I think that Trey Young was my ideal person that I would have put in there, honestly.
Yeah, and I don't know. I did hear some Anthony Edwards talk, but I think he sprained his ankle, so I don't think he'll be eligible. I don't know. I think Trey Young would be the best option. But speaking of Bradley Beal, do you think he'll still be in Washington after this offseason?
Man, it's so tough because of the fact that I know he loves Washington. Like, I used to live in the DC metropolitan area, and I know how much he really has a connection to that city. And I feel like he wants to make it work there, but I feel as though it might not even be his choice at some point. I feel as though he wants to make it work, but the Wizards are kind of just going to realize, look, we're going to hit a point where we're going to have diminishing returns on this, because he's going to eventually hit 30, or he's going to start to come down from that peak. And we got to get the most assets we can for him at this point while his value is at its highest. So after this season, I mean, if it ends, I think they're probably going to give the Russ and Bradley Beal thing another go, since this year was so impacted by COVID and injuries. But I think after this upcoming season, they probably will try to be more aggressive looking for trades for him, because it's always been we're not trading Bradley Beal. But I mean, how much losing can you do? Like, dang.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really hard to see. And I don't honestly think I think either Westbrook or Bradley Beal is going to be traded during this offseason, but it will be interesting to see if they keep them and what will they add from that Wizards team, because again, I don't know if a lot of free agents, and the free agency isn't that great this year, so you'll probably see a lot of trades. Yeah. But I just don't know what Washington can really bring. And again, if you're a top free agent, do you really want to go to DC? It's really interesting. It's going to be interesting what they do with their coach, because it seems like I think it was Wes Unseld Jr. is the projected head coach, or I can't remember now. I think he's the front runner. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens, and we'll definitely be keeping an eye. Let's go to the NBA Finals now. The Suns and Bucks series tied 2-2 now. At the time of this recording, it was on Friday morning. But I think there's a really good chance of the Bucks winning the next 2 games and taking the series, because I originally said the Bucks in 6, and with the last 2 games has really shown me is the Bucks, they're finally in this, and I feel like there's a really good chance for them to win. What do you think about the Bucks' chances this finals?
Man, this series, a problem with these types of series is that it's true what they say. A series really doesn't start till someone wins on the road. And the problem with this series is that it's so hard to gauge, because both teams gave us kind of an extreme version of how they look at home. Like, In game 2, Phoenix hit 23s, and that was a franchise record, and they shot 50% from 3. Like, what? They don't do that, you know what I mean? And Chris Middleton goes off for 40, but then the next game he could easily give you 15. So we got extreme versions of things. And then in game 3, Jrue Holiday was 5 of 10 from 3, and that has not been anything close to what Jrue Holiday's given us the other 3 games of the series. So it's so hard to gauge this series. I think Mike Budenholzer, for all the crap that he got in the Brooklyn Nets series for his adjustments or lack of, I think in this series he's made a lot of adjustments. So I think those adjustments could result in them possibly taking the series, but it's just so hard to tell because the baseline of the series isn't there yet, because every team has kind of done things they don't normally do just from playing at home.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, you just mentioned it. You know, it's not a series until a away team wins, and on Saturday night we'll find out what happens. But man, I'm really looking forward to this Saturday night because this is going to be probably the biggest game so far. And I think what they said, 71% of the time, if a team wins Game 5, they win the series. Which it might be different now, but again, this is just such a pivotal game. And again, I think this is the most pivotal game of this series. What did you think about Chris Paul's performance in Game 4? Because it seemed like it just wasn't quite there. And of course, at the end, he made the turnover, which in my opinion, he kind of choked. But what did you think about his performance in Game 4?
Bro, when I tell you, when I was watching that, and I literally was like, okay, Phoenix has a chance to tie the game here. And when I saw Chris Paul turn the ball over, I was like, oh, no way, he didn't just do that. I was like, there's no shot Chris Paul just turned the ball over like that. And then I was like, oh, it's happening again. Like, this happened in the Thunder series. This happened when he was a Clipper and they were playing the Thunder. This happened then. It happened when they were playing the Houston Rockets. They had a 3-1 lead when he was with the Clippers. And I'm just like, this is like, you just can't make this up of how this happens to Chris Paul all the time. And in Game 4, there was a period there where it felt like he was in control, like he was gaining control back. And then it was like, they were like, okay, let's get Jrue Holiday back in the game. And it just went to crap. So I don't know, man. I think he's really struggling with. Now, I will say, for all the crap that Jrue Holiday gets on about his offense, he deserves the credit for his defense because he is just giving Chris Paul fits on the offensive side of the basketball, and it's showing, especially in that Game 4. Like, you got 5 turnovers to 7 assists. That's just not Chris Paul turnover or assist turnover ratio at all. So I think that Game 4 was really tough. I was like, dang, dude, you can't. Like, they can't lose this series because he's been bad in like the other half of the series. So it's just tough to watch.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, as much I did at first when the Bucks traded for Jrue Holiday, I thought they traded way too much. But then I'm looking now, and you go what 9 months later, a year later. I guess it would have been 9 months later now. But now you see, wow, that was actually a good trade, and the Bucks now, they look like the winners of that trade in the Jrue Holiday sweepstakes. But I mean, but that block that Giannis had on DeAndre, that might be, as people have been saying, that was his signature moment. What did you think about that?
Bro, that block was. I broke it down somewhat on my podcast some as well. So I want to kind of bring the same breakdown here, but. So the crazy thing about that block that Giannis, I think people don't even give Giannis full credit for. Yeah, he's guarding Devin Booker on him coming to the basket, and he's playing up on him so that way he can't get that mid-range jumper. But normally in those situations, what's supposed to happen is that the person who's guarding the corner is supposed to crash down and help on the big that's rolling to the basket so that the big isn't available for a lob. So but because of the fact that Giannis is so fast and athletic, the Bucks scheme is schemed in a way that all the guys in the corners don't crash down, so they don't leave corner shots open, because Chris Paul was open in the corner if Jrue Holiday fully crashes down. But to recover in that way, you're covering 2 guys on one play, dude, that's just crazy. And he even said in the post-game press conference that he wasn't necessarily going for the block. He said he was going to protect the rim, and he was putting his hand up for the rim, and you can see it in those pictures, like he's just going to put his hand up at the rim. He said if DeAndre Ayton would have went for a layup, it would have been a goaltend. And the fact that DeAndre Ayton tried to dunk on him is what essentially like resulted in him getting blocked. And I'm just like, dude, that's just it was an amazing athletic play. It's one of those plays that I'm like, I don't think only Giannis could have made that play. You know what I mean? Like when you saw LeBron's block, you're like, okay, only LeBron, like that's something LeBron could do. And I feel like this is something only Giannis could do, to be that athletic, that long, and that fast. It was crazy, bro.
Yeah, and it just, man, that was when I saw that play, I was like, shoot, that was a game changer in my opinion. And I think the Suns were down by 1 or 2 at the time, I think. And I mean, that block basically saved them the win, and just, it was very incredible. And again, Giannis, in my opinion, he didn't have the best game then, because I feel like Chris Middleton played really good, especially down the end of the game. But that block, of course, pretty much the game changer. It helps the Bucks hold on and win, or come back from the win, or come back to get the win. But again, that was just incredible. Speaking of Chris Middleton, he's been pretty solid this postseason, or this finals. I wouldn't say he's the finals MVP if they do go on and win, because I think Giannis is going to get it if the Bucks do come back and win Game 5 and 6. But what have you thought about Chris Middleton's performance? And do you think he's a Batman, or do you think he's more of a Robin?
Oh man, dude. Man, look, the Chris Middleton was great in Game 4. Like, he was fantastic. In terms of hitting timely buckets, every single time the Bucks needed a late shot, he hit one of those shots. In terms of the Finals MVP thing, yeah, there's no shot he wins it. There's just no way. Like, he's had good games, I guess, for his standard, but he hasn't, not one game has he shot over 50% from the field, even though he's had these like kind of big high point games. And it's hard to give a guy the Finals MVP when you're having like such high ups and then downs. You can't go from 40 and then in Game 3 you had like 17. You know what I mean? Like, that's just tough to do when Giannis has been averaging, like, he had 2 40-point games and he hasn't scored under less than 20 on plus 50% shooting. So it's just tough to give. It's like you're almost trying to give it to someone else when it's obvious it's Giannis. But when it comes to the Batman Robin question, I just don't even, I can't even fathom it. You know what I mean? Because I just don't see, how can you show up in select instances? Like, Batman's always there to save the day. You feel what I'm saying? Like, Robin's there to help Batman in the off chance that maybe somebody catches the slip on Batman in some way or form. But in most cases, Batman's always going to be there to handle the job. That's not Chris Middleton. That's Giannis. Giannis is the one that, on a consistent basis, you can depend on Giannis. You're going to get at least 25 points, 10 rebounds, and whatever other statistical category, whether it's 5 assists, a block, 2 steals, or something of that sort. That's just not Chris Middleton. Yeah, he's their closer, but being the closer isn't the same as being a Batman. Batman is the guy who, when that light comes on, he can't be a day where he's like, man, you know what, I'm off today, dude. Like, you always got to be ready to answer the bell, and Chris Middleton just isn't that guy.
I've just been super impressed with Middleton's performance this postseason because, again, he's been great. But we'll see what ends up happening in Game 5 and Game 6. Let's go to the Suns. What do you think they need to do in Game 5 in order to win Game 5 and to ultimately win the series?
I think for them, they got to figure out ways to get Jrue Holiday off of Chris Paul. I think the problem with the Suns, at least in Game 3 and 4, was the fact that they couldn't get simultaneous great games from Chris Paul and Devin Booker. Like, in Game 3, Chris Paul played okay. He played like up to his normal standard. He had more turnovers than normal, but he still played up to his normal standards. Devin Booker was bad in Game 3. Then Game 4, Devin Booker explodes for 42, and Chris Paul only has 10 points. And it's one of those situations where you have to get those guys performing on the same, like, I got to get the consistency from both those guys as well. And as well as looping in DeAndre Ayton, whatever form of that may be. But I think that's the key for the Suns, because I think for them defensively, I think like Chris Middleton has just been, like I said, he's been so up and down. I think what they're doing with him is good defensively, because it hasn't shown that he consistently is going off on them for points or whatever. Like, he's struggling when they are putting guys like Mikal Bridges on him or Jay Crowder or whom have you on him. So I think for them, it's mainly getting Chris Paul sort of a break at some point, like getting him a rest just miniature rest throughout the game.
Yeah, and Chris Paul and Devin Booker have been pretty solid this playoffs, and they were really good in Game 1 and 2, but it seems like Game 4 and Devin Booker did not have, or the last 2 games, I would say Devin Booker has not been playing that great. And I think, again, they're the 2 best players in the Suns, so they need to be able to step up, in my opinion, to win Game 5. Do you have a prediction for Saturday night?
I think Game 5. I think honestly, the Suns win Game 5 because I think this kind of goes similar to how I can't remember which series it was. If it was the Clippers versus the Clippers were playing somebody, and I remember every game was being won at home. Oh, it was the Clippers every game is being won away. The Clippers and the Mavericks. But I feel like this is going to be one of those series where every game's going to be won at home. I'm hoping for a 7-game series. So this is kind of the only way I see it happening. And I feel as though both teams are just going to protect home court. And then Game 7 is kind of like, all right, let's see how this goes. Let's slow down.
Yeah, Game 7 is more like, what happened before Game 7 is completely history, and it just all comes tonight. You need to bring your A game. And we haven't seen a Game 7 since, 2016? And that was a great game. The Cavs ended up beating the Warriors, but that was a great game. And, I would love to see a Game 7 series. I just think the way the Bucks have been playing, I think they're going to win Game 5 and 6, but, I could be completely wrong. I'm wrong a lot. So, and plus with this playoffs, it's been crazy. Someone could get injured again. There's just anything that could happen on Saturday night and Monday night, and then I think Tuesday, I think Thursday night is Game 7. I want to say if they do, if it's necessary. And again, it's been a great playoffs. I've been saying that a lot, but it's just been an incredible series. But before we end the interview, I forgot to mention this earlier. Kawhi Leonard he had surgery on his knee. It looks like he's going to be out for a while, and maybe the beginning of the season. Do you think, and it looks like he's going to opt out to get a bigger contract, and we've seen players do this. Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson did this back in 2019, but they still got massive deals with their teams that they are with now. I know a torn ACL and a knee is totally different, but do you think the Clippers will resign Kawhi Leonard to give him that max or that super max?
Without a doubt. I think that situation, they invested into, like, their whole team outlook for the next few years is Kawhi and Paul George. Like, you don't trade Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, all those draft picks and so on, to only have these guys for 2 years. That's just a waste. You know what I mean? So I feel like they're on that boat. They're going to rise with the boat, or they're going to sink with that Kawhi and Paul George boat at this point. If Kawhi wants to re-sign there, I'm pretty sure the Clippers are going to be waiting at the door with the pen in hand.
Yeah, I think he likes LA, and I think he likes the situation that he's in right now. And again, I guess the Clippers, before the season this year, they signed Paul George to that massive deal, and Paul George is Kawhi's one of his best friends, and that was one of the big reasons why Kawhi went to the Clippers, because Paul George came. And I think they're going to sign him too. But there is another chance that I could see maybe Kawhi signing another 1 or 2 short-term deal. But now with the injury, I think it's more likely he's going to sign. I think he's eligible for a Supermax, and he's definitely worth that. We all know he's a top 3, top 5 player, and in my opinion, he's one of the best players in the league. But I just think that at this time right now, he's going to sign the deal. Do you think he misses or how long do you think he'll be out for?
Man, with the way these ACL tears are going nowadays, I'd probably say he comes back in the middle of next season. With the way the rehab and stuff goes for this, because most guys aren't freak athletes like Adrian Peterson to just come back 6 months later after tearing your ACL and what have you. But I think he probably comes back in the middle of the season, especially because Kawhi in particular is very, very, very protective of his injuries and his body. So I think he probably comes back mid-season. But I wanted to ask you this: didn't you think it was kind of weird that in the Western Conference Finals, if this was the issue, why didn't they just come out and say it? It was kind of like we kept going from game to game where it was like, oh, well, Kawhi might be back for Game 6. Kawhi might be back. It's like, dude, if he has a torn ACL, like, what?
It was weird, but I think the reason why they did that was because they could keep the Suns on their toes. And I think the Suns originally thought Kawhi was done for the rest of the series, or done for the whole series. But I think they still wanted to keep teams guessing. And I don't know if that's allowed in the NBA. I don't think it is. I don't know if they got a fine or not, but I think they just were kind of keeping them on their toes, to be honest with you, just to see, because they would make their game plan would be completely changed. And of course the series was still good. I mean, it went to 6 games. Paul George played great. Now we did have some games, but that's Paul George. But that's kind of the reason why Paul George is a number 2 and not a number 1. But Again, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think as a Kawhi Leonard fan, I would like him to come early in the season, but knowing Kawhi, he wants to have his knee at 100% or close to that before he gets back on the court. And it's just going to be interesting to see what happens. But before we end the interview, and thanks again for coming on, Brendan, but if you want to talk more about your podcast to see what you have in store and all that good stuff.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I'm just doing different interviews with also future guests. The last podcast episode I had, one of the last interviews I did was with Marvin Williams Sr. He's the father of former NBA player Marvin Williams Jr. And I'd love to just get those kind of guys on because they do shed a light on the NBA in a different way, sometimes from a different perspective than we, the fans, have or the media have of the game. So just bringing different type of guests on, maybe getting you on there as well. And also just breaking down future NBA finals games and also the NBA draft coming up and NFL free agency and stuff like that as well, because that's going to be interesting to get into, especially with the NFL season around the corner.
Yeah, thanks again for coming on. It was a great conversation. Again, the NBA finals is so fun to talk. In this last month, we've been going nonstop with the NBA, so it's been great. Again, thanks for coming on, Brendan. We just go check out his podcast or KBR Sports at Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Is that all the places you can get it at?
Anywhere, bro. iHeartRadio,
Okay.
Google Podcasts, and anywhere like a podcast can get uploaded to, that it's there.
Okay, thanks for coming on, and have a great rest of your day, Brendan. Thanks for listening to the Sports Town Podcast, or the STP Pod for short. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and much more. Also, follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Sports Town Podcast. If you want to check out more videos of the Sports Town Podcast, click on the right.